Shocking is how a lot of people have described what they saw on Newshub Live at 6 last night. I'm joined now by the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Good morning, Morena.
Good morning, Morena.
Good to see you. What was your reaction to those projections?
Look, it just reaffirms for me why it is so important that we do two things. Firstly, that we play our part in making sure that we are reducing our emissions as a nation. That is ultimately why we're seeing these sea level rises, so we need to do our part. The second thing is making sure that we are prepared, not treating it as an inevitability that we will see continual sea level rise, but preparing ourselves. At the moment, we're in the process of working on a national adaptation plan. And also, at the same time, working on issues around managed retreat. Now, that is a last option in many cases, but we do need to have that level of preparation.
So what about people right now who are looking at buying coastal properties?
Yeah,
would you buy a house in Olfedo Bay in Wellington?
And so this is where, ultimately, we need to make sure councils have really good information for two reasons, so that they're able to do planning to ensure that there are zoning areas where there are risk, and we're not seeing new infrastructure being built in places where we know it's at risk, so that we don't see those stranded assets.
Would you say to people who are considering coastal properties in these areas at the moment, would you say, look, you're kind of on your own?
Look, and here, so two things. Firstly, of course, having as much information out there as possible for people is really key, and that's what reports like this provide. At the same time, there's a piece of work that we know needs to be done around where does the cost burden fall, where we have residential housing or assets, whether be they local or central government, where they're impacted, you know, because
councils will get overwhelmed. I mean, the sheer scale of what they're talking about now and the speed at which that's going to happen, councils will likely become overwhelmed with the cost pressures. Does government have a role in
well, this is the work we're
that?
doing right now, and it's first thing we've said is it's not the case that central government can cover the cost of every impact from sea level rise, and nor will that necessarily be appropriate. So that's why we're doing work at the moment with local government and private insurers around how do we ensure that the cost burden is falling in the appropriate place. Yeah. We've had a couple of examples where we've already had to work through these issues before in certain areas, but they've been ad hoc. We need a national approach to how we deal with this question.
Buy with caution if you're looking at coastal land.
Just look at all of the information.
Yeah. Let's talk about tax. David Parker, my old mate David Parker, your Revenue Minister, was on our show on Friday, and he said there are many, many ways to have a fairer tax system. He mentioned the potential for a capital gains tax, a stamp duty, a wealth tax, a deemed income tax.
He's also, of course, said that we're sticking to our policy of no new taxes this term.
This term.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to talk about. Going into the election next year, it's entirely possible. I just want to get a steer on what's on and off the table.
The only reason I'm laughing is because, of course, we haven't prepared our tax policy for the next election yet.
But
so this is going to be a fairly short line of questioning.
But you've ruled out a capital gains tax while you're leader.
Yes,
that stands.
Yes.
The wealth tax being ruled out while you're leader.
I'm not going to, Ryan.
No, so that stands.
Ryan, you're asking me to project beyond into the next election and beyond, and I'm not going to do that. We haven't formulated our tax policy for the 2023 election. All that Minister Parker is doing right now, and I think, you know, New Zealanders would accept that this is a good thing to do, is to understand where the burden of tax currently falls.
100%.
Shouldn't we have this information?
Totally, I think we should.
Yeah, good.
But you said...
And now you're asking me to form a policy on information we have not yet gathered yet as well.
Only because you've previously said while you were leader on a wealth tax.
Oh, no, on capital gains tax, I have said while I'm in this role, having campaigned on it many times before,
to capital gains.
We needed, and now I'm not going to set out a commentary beyond that.
Okay, so beyond that, anything's possible.
Oh, we haven't formulated a policy.
I know, I totally get that.
And I'm in all honesty, it's just not something that we've worked on yet. We're in the role of governing.
100%, but you're not ruling out the potential for a wealth tax, the potential for a stamp duty.
We have not worked on our tax policy for 2023.
Is the tax system fair?
Well, at the moment, this is the work that we want to gather. I mean, one of the examples that's been used is that in some of the survey work we've done, it doesn't expose the fact that we have people whose incomes are over $20 million. It stops short of that. So that tells us there's a gap in our system at the moment.
Minister Parker says he doesn't think it's fair. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's the example he's using.
So why won't you do something about it?
Well, you're asking me to set out a policy we just haven't worked on. So I'm just being honest with you, Ryan. We have not developed our 2023 tax policy.
Do you think that's something... Is that something that members of your cabinet want?
Oh, and nor have we had the discussion. Look,
None of your
to...
ministers have told you that that's a preference that they have, an avenue they want to explore?
We have not. This is over a year out, and at the moment what we're trying to do is make sure that all New Zealanders have the information around how our current system works. There are parts of our system that are really good, that are simple, that are easy to understand relative to other countries. We have other parts, like working for families, that try and redistribute and try and make our system fairer. But we're fairly confident that this activity, this exercise of getting information, will tell us that there are parts of our system not working well.
And then you'll look to address those?
Yeah, that's
government,
yeah,
right?
That's government.
Yeah, okay, very good. And the other option, of course, with the capital gains tax is that you would not be there at the next election. Therefore, it could be on the table. Are you 100%...
It's a bit brutal, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I don't know, it's politics. Are you 100% cast iron assurance this morning you will be there?
The reason that I gave that assurance is nothing to do about whether I would be here or gone. It was because, in my view, we had that debate with New Zealand, and New Zealand had not accepted it, and we needed to move on.
Yeah, so you'll 100% be there at the election?
I have no intention of going anywhere, right?
All right, good. Let's talk about youth crime. Obviously, it's been in the headlines. I know you've had the truancy announcement yesterday. Yeah. Is there scope, do you think, for really targeted support, like what Bill English used to talk about with social investment, where you have a number of risk factors which are being identified? These ram raids, you know, often the children have been involved with oranga tamariki. There are known issues that the government knows about with the parents, etc., etc. What's wrong with targeting support directly to those individuals, as was suggested by Bill English with social investment and dropped under Labor?
Oh, well, look, the programs that do that still exist. And so there's nothing wrong with targeting the groups that you are working with. And so that is where I think we have seen the positive impacts of some of those programs that really are at a community level. Because, yes, we absolutely have seen a spike in issues like ram raids. But overall, we have not seen a spike in youth appearances to our youth court. In fact, we've seen actually a decline in repeat offending.
What do you put it down to then, the ram raid stuff?
Oh, look, when you ask police, I mean, they've put up a couple of reasons. They've said that, yes, there'll be some social issues there where you see disengagement, as you've said, with school and education. That's where... as you mentioned yesterday, we're talking about the extra work we're doing to get kids re-engaged and deal with truancy.
What about consequences?
Another reason. I'll come back to that if I can.
Do children feel that there are consequences? I just wouldn't mind putting out the rest of police's list because it's really interesting. Yeah. They also talk about the impact of social media. Yes.
They talk about the fact that sometimes kids are targeting particular products or goods because they identify a value or a market for those. And then there's all of the other complex social issues. So a range of reasons, but it tells us what we should be targeting. We don't want a knee-jerk reaction. We want to make sure we do what works to deal with these issues as well.
Do you think that children feel like there are consequences in life? Or do you think as a society we've gotten to a place where children feel like they can get away with this stuff?
Well, what's really interesting, and I always come back to the research, and here, if you ask Richie Poulton, who's been doing a study on young people since the 1970s, tracking them in childhood through to when they become adults, he talks about the importance of kids learning restraint, because that demonstrates whether or not as adults or as young adults they engage in risk-taking behaviour, and that can be across a whole course of areas. And that's where you see sometimes that link from kids into their adulthood and engaging in criminal activity. So we're actually doing work on how do we teach kids restraint in early childhood and beyond. So that's going to take 20 years to prove its worth, but we need to do it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.